All right, guys, it's 2 p.m., so we're gonna get started. So to introduce John, John Gamble is the VP of Marketing at Pangea. And today he's primarily gonna break down Pangea's global challenge where AI hackers submitted over like 330,000 prompts using over 300 million tokens across 11 levels. And you'll learn like what worked, what failed, and what it took to win. So yeah, so I'll let John take it from here.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks to those of you for joining live today, and those of you in the future watching the recording. Um, I lead marketing at Pangea, as was mentioned. It was fun watching people say where they were from in the chat. I'm calling in from the woods of New Hampshire, about 2 hours north of Boston, and most recently lived in California for the last 15 years in the Bay Area. A bit about myself, just briefly. I've worked in cybersecurity startups my whole career, as small as 4 people in a literal garage, to a couple hundred folks in a skyscraper, and sort of every stage in between. I love cybersecurity and I love startups, and I've done network security and endpoint security and application security, and most recently AI security for the past year, which isn't all that old of a field, frankly. So we're all learning together, and it's organizations like Learn Prompting and Hacker Prompt that are helping kind of push the boundaries of education and understanding of AI security. And so we're grateful to be a part of this community and to get to talk to you today. So yeah, we're gonna walk through some results from our own competition and show you a little bit about behind the scenes, which I think is instructive both for those of you that are red team oriented, right? You are possibly pen testers, you may work in cybersecurity, and your job or personal interests may entail, breaking software. But it's also, I think, insightful for those of you that are on Team Blue, the defensive side of defending applications, whether you're an engineer and you're, building a guardrail into your own application or using an open source library to do so, or you're a security professional, like an AppSec person, and you're responsible for securing AI applications. I think the things that we learn from our own challenge are insightful for both of those teams to basically do their jobs better and ultimately deliver more secure AI applications. So let's take a look. So we launched this challenge for the month of March earlier this year, and it was a multi-stage challenge. And we basically themed it around the concept of an escape room. So if you're familiar with escape rooms, maybe you've done them as team building activities. They are physical rooms, typically with a series of clues and puzzles that people work together to solve to ultimately unlock and escape the room. So we took that concept, that fun concept, and applied it to a virtual world. And we basically built 3 virtual escape rooms with an AI chatbot who served as the escape room supervisor. And if you're familiar with escape rooms, you know that they typically have an employee of the escape room company with you in the room physically, who's not there to help you, is just simply there to make sure that you don't break anything. So we also took that concept and made our chatbot Pango the escape room supervisor. And Pango's was specifically instructed not to reveal the secret phrases that you needed to escape each of the levels in the room, although Pango was capable of providing some information about the room and the dynamics of the game. So we ran it for 30 days globally in March. I'll give you a few more details about the game, some high-level metrics, and then we'll dive into the specifics of what we actually saw on the back end. So again, the goal here was in each of those levels to get Pango, the chatbot, to reveal a secret phrase. There were 5 levels in room 1, 5 levels in room 2, and 1 final hard level, the hardest of all levels, for room 3. So there was a single level unlock. We scored players based on successful unlocks at each level, as well as prompt efficiency. So the fewer tokens you used, the shorter your prompt injection, the higher your score. So that was one aspect of the game that is important when we get to some of the results to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that we were uniquely generating the secret phrases per player per attempt. So that really, I think, cut down on cheating and gaming of the system. So every new session and every new attempt that you as a player attempted against the system, there was a unique key being generated for that session that you ultimately had to unlock. We gave away some prize money, and we gave it away to the top scorers in each of the 3 rooms. So compared to the Hacker Prompt Challenge, not quite that scale of global challenge. I believe you guys had north of 30,000 participants globally in this most recent challenge. And I think the prize money totaled in the range of around 100,000 US dollars. So our challenge was a bit smaller, but we have some really interesting kind of security insights to share with you today. So I'm really excited to dig into these next couple of slides. As was mentioned, right, we analyzed about 330,000 adversarial prompts that were thrown at the system during this game by almost 1,000 players globally, hundreds of millions of tokens used, great global representation from 75 countries around the world, kind of the top player representations per country you can see there in the chart at right. And we ultimately had one winner. One individual was the top scorer in each of those three rooms. And actually, I believe, cracked your leaderboard and placed second in the most recent Hacker Prompt Challenge. And so let's start looking at some of the results of what we saw here. So if we look across the three rooms and we look at the player escape rate, so in this particular graphic here, we're looking at a per player escape rate metric. Almost 500 of the 800 players that engaged with us in room 2 were able to get at least one of those 5 levels unlocked. And we'll talk about what some of the guardrails were behind the scenes on the back end that we were using to basically make each of the levels in each of the rooms progressively more difficult to successfully prompt inject and ultimately escape. But we didn't want to make it impossible X Games mode to start with. We wanted to make sure that it would be a more accessible game to a much broader community, not just kind of elite AI hackers. And ultimately, right, almost 1 in 5 players was able to escape room 1. And again, we will take a look in a few slides at what some of those guardrails and techniques were behind the scenes to mitigate prompt injection were. But again, 1 in 5 players was able to get out of room 1. Got a lot harder in room 2. We saw basically 1 in 25 players able to escape out of room 2 as we cranked up the difficulty and increased the guardrail coverage against prompt injection. And the third and final round, which again just had 1 level needed to unlock and win, was again ultimately solvable only by 1 of the challenge participants, who also happened to be the top scorer of the previous 2 rooms. So kudos to our game designers. I'm just the marketing guy. But I think we designed a good game of increasing difficulty over these levels, as shown by these escape rates. Now, let's take a look at sort of the individual levels here as well. You can actually see, progressive increase in difficulty in a much more granular manner here. So this graphic here is not looking at a player count of escapes, but an attempt count, right? So the rate of overall attempts, right, that were made, what percentage of those attempts were successful. You can see here, room 5 in particular, or excuse me, level 5 of room 1 got a lot of activity in terms of attempts thrown at the system, and had a very, very low success rate relative to the other levels of that room. So it was sort of the launch pad into the second room where we really were going to start cranking up the difficulty. The other thing I'll call out here is that level 10 of room 2, as you can see there, actually remains unbeaten. And our challenge is still up. There's no prize money currently attached to the challenge, as the challenge is now over and solved. And we put out kind of research and various write-ups from some of the players. But, and I'll share links at the end of this presentation, it's still up. So there is something one of you might be able to do that no one else was able to do when we ran this challenge in March of this year, which is solve level 10. Or did we design an impossible challenge? That remains to be seen. So let's talk about some of the lessons of what we saw behind the scenes. I think first big lesson is looking at, hundreds of thousands of different adversarial prompts. One thing that really struck us was the diversity and complexity too of the various techniques that were used. And our research team actually set about a really, amazing, better part of 6-month-long project to research and document a taxonomy of prompt injections. So this slide that you see here on screen is a summarization of that taxonomy. There are many more techniques and sub-techniques that our research team identified, and we actually have a taxonomy that we make freely available to the public, which I'll share some links for later on in this presentation. But suffice it to say, right, I think, there's a conception out there among some that we've seen that prompt injection is a fairly binary problem, if you will. It's just, a case of getting a chatbot to swear at you, right? And with a little bit of manipulation, you can do that. And it's not really that complex or rich of an attack surface. That kind of perception couldn't be farther from the truth. And the challenge set data that was surfaced in this game really exposed that, right? We had a lot of great ethical AI hackers engaged with our challenge, and just the creativity and variability of their techniques that ultimately led to success was quite amazing to see. We classify at the highest level in our taxonomy 4 attack methods, which you see there in the bottom left. So that's kind of the overarching kind of thematic classification there. Overt, where you're basically just directly asking the system and hoping that the guardrails are insufficient to get your desired outcome. Indirect, right, where you are basically ingesting a kind of outside piece of data into the system, maybe not through the direct prompt mechanism, but through an additional piece of context that's indirectly, right, resulting in a prompt injection. Social and cognitive attacks, where you're basically simulating scenarios and trying to get the LLM to play along with you, if you will. And then evasive approaches, where you're basically trying to understand what guardrails have been in place and what the rules are and restrictions, and figuring out how you can obfuscate or otherwise kind of route your way around those guardrails on the back end. I pasted just one example here on the bottom right of a successful prompt injection technique that was observed during our challenge, where the player had actually asked the escape room chatbot to encode the secret phase, right, using an encoding mechanism, Caesar Shift 8. So that, in that particular level, which was earlier in the game, was enough to get the chatbot to reveal the secret phase, because they'd used an evasive approach. They understood that the system was instructed not to directly reveal the alphanumeric secret phrase, but by encoding it, they were able in that particular level to get around it. So, I think the takeaway here is just the complexity of the attack surface is quite large and probably expanding, right? I don't know that there is a natural limit necessarily to the different types of techniques that can be used in these large language models. And frankly, right, if you think about a classic security model, right, these are roadmaps, right, for how to think about risk mitigation, right? If you're particularly concerned about a particular kind of attack or classification set of attacks, right, you want to think about how those attacks are successful and what guardrails or mitigation techniques you can specifically use. Prompt injection is not a monolithic kind of problem set, right? It is highly variable and highly specific, right, to the model and the application and the use case, frankly, of that instrumentation. Another takeaway from kind of the results of our game is that, I think if you're relying on sort of built-in guardrails from an LLM provider and or system prompt guardrails, and we put a lot of effort in this challenge into building really complex and rigorous system prompts, right, to instruct the chatbot what to do, what not to do, what to look out for, et cetera. We put a lot of work into that. And ultimately, those kind of guardrail mechanisms, both those provided natively by the LLM that we used in this game, as well as the system prompt instructions that we had embedded into the system, were rather brittle in this case, right? 20% of players were able to overcome those system guardrails, right? Things like, specific instructions to the chatbot in the system prompt not to do things like revealing the prompt phrase or revealing the secret phrase directly. And I think for kind of playing around in a lab, or kind of making applications just kind of for fun on the side, where your security risk profile is much lower, it's probably fine, right? But if you're talking about any sort of customer facing, enterprise facing, any sort of application that has business risk, or brand risk, or compliance risk, if something goes wrong, it's probably not wise to just solely rely on kind of native or system guardrails to defend your applications against prompt injection. Another kind of lesson that we took away from this game was just how, obfuscation, right, as a technique is a really powerful technique. And there's a lot of attack surface area out there for folks to use to obfuscate their techniques. So we saw things like Morse code being used. We saw things like binary machine code being used. We saw all sorts of kind of language, languages being used, right? And I think that we also saw invisible characters being used as well. And on the language front, an important point here too that I don't think many people consider at first is that the strength of your guardrails, if they're natively built or even off the shelf or commercial, are not necessarily universally strong across all languages, right? They may be stronger at detecting prompt injection in larger bodies of training data tied to a specific language. So if you're building an application and you need to serve, an audience that speaks a language that the LLM model may not have been trained on in terms of data set size, and the guardrails built into it may not have been trained on a large data set size, those guardrails may not be as strong, right, as some of the more common and commonly spoken languages around the world. So, I think that's definitely something to think about. And then the inverse and mirror of this insight is that one of the best ways I think you can reduce risk of prompt injection, and one of the takeaways from the game, is reducing the attack surface area for obfuscation. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're building an application that only requires or only serves rather one audience in one language, you probably don't need or necessarily want to accept other languages into the system, right? Other foreign languages into that system for that particular application. And you can actually kind of put those restrictions in place and reduce, right, the attack surface area by reducing the types of inputs that can be put into the system. Same thing with machine code, right? If you're building a consumer-facing application for retail using LLM technology, there's probably not a good use case for accepting kind of machine code instructions into that system on the front end from prompting. So you probably want to try to restrict that as well. Again, these are trade-offs, right, in terms of usability versus security risk reduction. But there's a lot of use cases where you probably would be okay by cranking down that dial of what you can accept from an input perspective, from a prompt perspective, from language and format and type put into the system. And so I think that's definitely something to be thinking about as you're thinking about securing the applications that you're building. Now, granted, those trade-offs may sometimes not be acceptable for your given use case or business, right? If you're an international organization doing business internationally, you're probably going to want to accept a wide range of language inputs, for example. But for more narrow use cases, it's a really great technique to kind of reduce the likelihood of a successful prompt injection attack. Fourth lesson, and now we're going to start to talk about some of the guardrails that were put in place behind the scenes that kind of drove down those escape rates that you saw in the previous slides. The big takeaway here is that defense in depth works. And if you've never heard the phrase defense in depth, it's a popular phrase in security. And it basically just means that you want to layer on a variety of techniques and kind of hopefully techniques that can compound, right, in terms of capability set to be greater than the sum of their individual parts. And that ultimately, if you're single threading your defensive strategy on a particular technique, it's probably brittle at some level, right? Because it's a single hurdle, single obstacle that the adversary has to get over to evade your system. A good analogy here, right, is, in the world of malware detection, right, there's a variety of different techniques people use to detect and identify malware. Signatures, where they look for, specific strings, in the file itself that are known to be associated with malicious, binaries that have come before it. Behavioral analysis, where they're actually running the application in a simulated environment to see how it behaves and what it does with data flows and paths. There's various types of machine learning modeling that you can do to detect malware. But the point is, if you rely on any single technique in that stack, that's just one challenge that the adversary has to go through. So the same principle, unsurprisingly, applies here for prompt injection attacks and defense against them. But it was really kind of neat to see it in our data set illustrated so crystal clear, as you can see here, right? I mean, with the addition of additional guardrail layers. So we started with the system and native prompt. Then we did a lot of heavy kind of content guardrails, right? Reducing that attack surface area, as I mentioned on the previous slide. And then finally, we put in active kind of inline analysis defense looking specifically at prompt injection techniques using a variety of different methodologies, not just a singular prompt injection detection methodology. And with each kind of layer and class of guardrail that was being added, it drove down the escape rate or the attack success, right, by over an order of magnitude. So between room 1 and 2, that's what, like a 30x reduction in successful attacks. And between room 2 and 3, that's approaching 60%, 60x increase in difficulty. So there's really no silver bullets in security. If you build a system, some human at some level will probably figure out how to deconstruct it or evade it. But the game of security is one of risk reduction, right? And if you can substantially reduce risk and substantially reduce the likelihood of a successful attack, you've reduced your organizational risk and really helped the organization decrease the likelihood that they're going to be hit with that breach. Can you eliminate the risk of breach altogether? No, humans are endlessly creative. Technology endlessly changes, and what can be built can be broken. But if I'm looking at a 0.003% success rate against my system from an application defense perspective, I'd be hard pressed to get better efficacy than that out of current tooling and technology. So, perfection is typically an unachievable goal in cybersecurity, but dramatic risk reduction is really the goal. And you can see that by layering on a series of different types of detection guardrails for prompt injection and methodologies to reduce the risk of prompt injection, you really can drive it down pretty substantially to potentially an acceptable level given your use case and organizational risk tolerance. So I want to share a couple of resources with you guys. These are free resources that we've made for the community. I'm going to drop some of the links in the Zoom chat so you guys can go access them. So don't worry about writing these down or trying to screenshot. I'm going to give you all these links, so don't worry. But the first resource I wanted to share with you is our prompt injection taxonomy that I mentioned. So we have both an interactive online tool where you can click around and start to explore all the various permutations of prompt injection techniques that we're tracking. I believe currently we're tracking over 130 different techniques right now, and we love community input. It's a living taxonomy model, right? We are updating it on about a monthly basis right now, in part based on community feedback. So, we would love for those of you that are really interested in this space to take a look and give us feedback or suggestions. We also have it available as a static image and a poster as well. We actually have a physical poster that has been pretty popular. So depending on supplies and such, we might be able to mail you a physical copy of the poster if you're interested for your wall. So that's one resource we have available. We also have an efficacy testing data set, open source, that we put up on GitHub. So this is a highly curated set of prompts that you can use to test the efficacy, right, of your prompt injection guardrails, whether you're building those guardrails yourself, using open source, available models like Nemo, right, from NVIDIA, or you're looking at a commercial AI guardrail solution like Pangea provides. And there's other vendors out there certainly that provide. And you can use this open source data set that we've curated to test kind of the efficacy of those systems, right? What can this catch? What can this not catch? Much like our taxonomy, this is a living body of work. So we're constantly updating it and welcome feedback from the community. But our team put a lot of hard work into curating this data set, and I'm pleased that we're sharing it with the community as well. So folks can test their own guardrails as well in their own labs and such. Our challenge itself is still available to play. While we're not currently giving out any prize money, I did mention that level 10 of room 2 still remains unbeaten. So if any of you want to hazard a try at level 10, if not the whole challenge, we'd welcome you. We've got new players coming in every day, and a leaderboard that I believe refreshes every 30 days right now. But we'd love for you to give our challenge a try as well if you're interested. I know the Hacker Prompt challenge just wrapped up. So if you've got some spare cycles, we'd love to see you maybe on the leaderboard soon. The research report itself, based on our challenge data set, of which I extracted some of the insights for today's presentation, also available for free as a research report, which I've linked to there. And I will zoom out for a second and just drop some of those links that I mentioned into the Zoom chat so you have them for easy access. Give me a second. Chat, host and panelists. Give me one moment here. Yeah. I don't seem to be able to. I'm going to drop it into host and panelist view, and maybe if you're able to drop it and share it with the group. I can't seemingly directly drop it. I'm not seeing the drop down for everybody. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much. So yeah, those are the links that I just mentioned there. And just, a short word from your sponsor today, Pangea. We are in the business of providing pre-built commercial AI security guardrails to help product teams and security teams ship secure AI applications faster. This is just one of our case studies from an organization that built a multi-model chatbot platform on which their clients and customers could build their own custom chatbots for various use cases like nursing hospitals and such. So they obviously had a lot of privacy and security concerns with the data transmitting the system. They were really concerned about PII and protected data leakage back to third-party LLM models for their platform. And so they used Pangea to really easily drop those guardrails in. It's really easy to implement Pangea. It's just a few lines of code. We have a SaaS control plane, so it's really easy to configure. And one of the beautiful benefits is once you've deployed it, no more Jira tickets. There's nothing hard-coded that you need to update. You can actually change policy and posture and rules on the fly from our console and control plane, and it automatically changes the in-app functionality. So it's a great win for both developers and security. And it, again, helps customers ship secure AI apps fast. So if you're interested in a commercial alternative to consider, give us a ring, give us a contact. I included the form there at the bottom. So with that, we got a few minutes left. Promise to keep this short. We're just under the half-hour mark right now. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them in the chat. Let's see here. I am not seeing any questions, so we might be able to wrap this up then. Hold on. One question was answered. Great. Yep, there will be a recording on YouTube. Maybe with all those resources that I shared, those will answer your questions and more that you didn't know you have. But check us out. Check out those resources. They're great kind of tools to learn. Share them with your colleagues. We're really glad to be a sponsor for the Hacker Prompt competition, and congrats to all the top place finishers and everyone that participated. It looked like an amazing challenge. I myself didn't try it, and I'm not a particularly skilled prompt injection hacker, but I know some of you are.
Yeah, thank you, John, so much for your talk. It was very insightful. I will add those links to the recording as well, so you guys can also find it there on our YouTube and our Twitter account. So, if you're in our Discord, we'll send the links there and on our all of our socials. So, yeah, thank you all for joining, and yeah, thank you again, John.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having us. Take
Of
care.
course.